Voices from History. The Fate of the 12, Faith after the Resurrection. That night, Jerusalem did not sleep. The city was filled with shadows, whispers, and fear. Doors were locked, lamps were dimmed, and hearts were heavy. Just days earlier, hope had walked openly through these streets, speaking of love, forgiveness, and a kingdom not made by human hands. Now, that same hope had been beaten, nailed to wood, and left to die under a darkened sky. The cross stood as a brutal reminder that following truth could cost everything. For those who had walked beside him, who had left their homes and families behind, it felt as if the world itself had collapsed. Disappointment settled deeply into their souls. They had believed Jesus was the one who would redeem Israel, who would change history forever. Instead, they watched him suffer in silence. Some fled, some wept. Some returned to the lives they once knew, unsure of what else they could do. One of them would later say that his heart could not accept what his eyes had not seen. Another denied even knowing him. In those hours, faith felt fragile, uncertain, almost unbearable. They did not yet understand that what seemed like the end was only the beginning. On the third day, everything changed. The tomb was empty. Death had been defeated, not by force, but by divine purpose. The resurrection did not erase fear from their lives, nor did it remove suffering from their path. Instead, it transformed fear into courage and suffering into testimony. Jesus had warned them that the world would hate them because of his name, and that endurance would be the true measure of salvation. Those words would soon become painfully real. What followed the resurrection was not peace, but persecution, not comfort, but calling. The message they carried challenged power, threatened authority, and exposed injustice. They were ordinary men entrusted with an extraordinary truth, and history would demand a price for it. One by one, their lives would become living witnesses to the meaning of perseverance. James, the son of Zebedee, had been a fisherman when Jesus called him. He was repairing nets by the Sea of Galilee, unaware that his hands would one day bear the weight of a much heavier burden. Alongside Peter and John, James stood closer to Jesus than most. He saw Christ transfigured in glory and later crushed by sorrow in the garden. When persecution reached Jerusalem, James did not hide. Under the orders of King Herod Agrippa, he was arrested and swiftly executed by the sword. There was no recorded speech, no dramatic farewell, only obedience unto death. He became the first apostle to be martyred, sealing his testimony with blood. Little is written about James, the son of Alphaeus, yet his silence does not diminish his faith. Tradition suggests he traveled through hostile lands, preaching a message that was unwelcome and dangerous. Accounts of his death vary, some saying he was thrown from the temple, others that he was crucified far from home. History does not preserve the details, but faith remembers his perseverance. Not every sacrifice is recorded, but every sacrifice matters. Matthew had once lived comfortably, collecting taxes for Rome and benefiting from the very system that oppressed his people. Educated, intelligent, and wealthy, he was despised by many. When Jesus called him, it shocked everyone. Grace often does. Matthew left everything behind and later used his skills to write an account of Jesus' life that would shape the faith of generations. Tradition holds that he carried the gospel into distant regions, where his life was eventually taken for the message he once recorded with such care. Andrew was a man who rarely stood in the center, yet always pointed others toward Christ. He preached tirelessly, eventually reaching Greece, where his faith led to condemnation. Sentenced to crucifixion, Andrew refused to die in the same manner as his master, declaring himself unworthy. His cross was shaped like an X, and according to tradition, he continued to speak of faith and hope even as his strength faded away. His humility became his final sermon. Peter's journey was marked by contradiction. Bold and impulsive, fearful and devoted, he denied Jesus when fear overcame him. Yet he would become a pillar of the early church. After Pentecost, Peter preached with authority, healed the sick, and led a growing movement that could no longer be silenced. In Rome, under brutal persecution, Peter was condemned to death. Like Andrew, he asked to be crucified upside down, believing himself unworthy to die as Christ had died. The man who once trembled before a servant girl faced death without turning away. Others followed similar paths, though their names are spoken less often. Simon the Zealot, once driven by political fervor, surrendered his cause to a greater kingdom. Philip, Bartholomew, Jude, Thaddeus, and Thomas carried the message across vast and dangerous lands. Thomas, remembered for doubt, traveled as far as India, where tradition says he was killed by a spear. Bartholomew preached in distant regions and, according to ancient accounts, met a violent end. Their stories are fragmented, their details uncertain, but their faith was unwavering. One story, however, stands apart. Judas Iscariot walked beside Jesus, heard his words, and witnessed his miracles. Yet he chose betrayal. Overcome by regret, he attempted to undo his actions, but despair consumed him. His life ended in tragedy, a reminder that being close to truth does not guarantee transformation of the heart. John, the youngest of the 12, was the only one who remained at the foot of the cross. He endured imprisonment, exile, and suffering, yet survived them all. Banished to the island of Patmos, he received visions that would become the book of Revelation, words of warning and hope that still echo through time. John did not die a martyr. He lived long enough to see the message spread across the world. Sometimes endurance means dying for faith. Sometimes it means living long enough to preserve it. The resurrection of Christ did not promise safety, comfort, or acceptance. It promised purpose. For the disciples, hope ceased to be a fragile feeling and became the foundation of their lives. 2,000 years later, their voices still speak, not through power or conquest, but through faith that endured until the end. History may forget their faces, but it has not forgotten their testimony.